Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're already at episode 20 somehow. This one's about a session I played at Aria last week. Visited a bunch of rooms, but my favorite session was at the Aria. I'm gonna give you guys a few reasons why I like this place and some of the reasons I don't. So without any further ado, let's jump right into some pros and cons for the Aria poker room. All right, one of the first things I noticed about the Aria is they always have games running and there's always plenty of games to pick from. So if you guys are someone who likes to table change, always get into the good games or the action games, this is a good room to do it at. There's always options and there's always another table if yours is not good. Secondly, and this should come as no surprise to anyone, all the materials used in the room, including chairs, tables, chips, decks, etc., are really high quality. Obviously, this is one of the highest end resorts in Vegas, so it's almost an expectation, but it's still very nice to play on, and I have no complaints regarding any of the stuff they use. Another thing I noticed that I love about this place, just like the rest of Vegas, is that they allow 100 big blind buy-ins, which, as you guys know, is a personal preference of mine. I'm always looking to play deep stack poker, so if you guys agree with that, you won't be disappointed at this place. The last point, which I forgot to mention last episode, is a pretty obvious one, but still pretty important when you're out trying to have fun, and that is free alcohol. As long as you're playing poker, you can order any drink, as many drinks as you want, so take advantage. All right, moving on to the cons. The main thing I don't like about this place is how cramped the floor space is. The room itself is not really that big, but for some reason they cramped a bunch of tables in there, pretty much as many as they could, which makes it an uncomfortable playing experience. You can't really get out and walk around, and even getting out of your seat, you're probably bumping into one or two people in the process. Something else I don't love about this place, which is also true for the rest of a lot of Vegas rooms, is how obnoxious and loud it is in there. If you're someone who likes to play in peace and quiet and concentrate, you're not gonna find that at the Aria. And pretty much the only place where you're gonna find a peaceful game is gonna be in Ivy's room, Table 1. Phil Ivy, the Baccarat Pro, ruined that. If you guys wanna play in some peace and quiet, all you gotta do is come up with around $100,000 and you get the private room in the back. So keep that in mind as you go in there to play. All that being said, I give this place a personal score of 6 out of 10. Despite all those things I just said, some negative things here and there, it's still one of my favorite places to play on the Strip, and I highly recommend you guys play a session there if you ever visit Las Vegas. Now that that's done, it's time to move on to some poker hands. I played 1-3 no limit. Buy-in was 100 to 300. I bought it for 300, so let's get the cards in the air and see if we can make some hands. Within the first orbit, there's a limper ahead, and I look down at pocket aces from the cutoff. I decide to make it $15 to go. The big blind makes the call and the limper folds, so we go heads up to a flop, which comes queen 10-10. The big blind checks. I decide to check. I don't mind betting. In fact, I prefer betting, but sometimes mixing in a check with overpairs is fine, so this time I decide to check. We go heads up to a turn, which is the jack of clubs, bringing in a ton of draws and 2 pair combos. So when the big blind checks, I think it's definitely time to put in a bet now, seeing as there's a lot of hands she could continue with. I make it $35 to go. She doesn't think for too long and makes the call. Being that she called pretty quickly but checked twice, I think the majority of her range in this spot is going to be draws, so I'm keeping that in mind as we go heads up to a river, which we're hoping is a brick, and sure enough, it's the 3 of hearts, so pretty much everything misses, shouldn't change anything. She checks it over one more time, and I think in this spot, sometimes she's going to have a pair that she can call with, but most of the time, as mentioned, it's going to be missed draws. So I decided to do something I actually haven't tried in the past, and I decided to micro bet in position to induce a raise from missed draws. I think if we put in a normal size bet here, like 3/4 pot or half pot, she's just gonna fold all her missed draws. And if we check behind, we're obviously just gonna win against those. So I figure the best way to try to get value from those is to bet really tiny and try to cause her to make a mistake. So I put in $15. She kind of laughs for a little bit and puts in the call with pocket 8s. Not the hand I was expecting, but I guess we got max value in that way. I know the micro bet to induce a bluff is usually done out of position, but I just wanted to try it in position and see if it worked. I think I might experiment a little more with that in the future. On to the next hand. In the next hand, we look down at ace-7 of clubs from the cutoff, make an open to $12, and both of the blinds call. So we go 3 ways to a flop of 9-5-3 with 1 club. They check it over to me, and although we pretty much missed, we could have the best hand, and we just don't have a hand that does very well giving up a free turn. So given that I think my opponents are gonna have air a lot of the time, I put in a bet. Don't have to go too big here, being that the board is so dry. Make it $15 to go, and surprisingly, they both call. So not exactly what I was expecting. Still 3 ways to a turn here, which gives us a lot of help. It's the jack of clubs. My opponents check it over to me, and although we pick up a decent amount of equity, and it would suck to get check raised, these opponents in particular were fairly passive, so I decided to keep my pedal to the metal. There's 2 ways of winning the hand. We could just take it down right here, or realize our equity on the river if we get called. Make it $45 to go. The small blind folds, and the big blind thinks for a little bit and calls. So we're looking for a little bit of help, I think, going into this river, and sure enough, it's the 5 of clubs. My opponent decides to lead out for $55 on this river, which I think most of the time is gonna be indicative of just air and trying to take the pot down, or he's gonna have a 5 or a weaker flush himself. Obviously, if he has a full house, we're gonna be value owning ourselves, but I think most of the time, if he has a set, he's gonna be check raising the turn. I decided to make it 140 to go. He thinks for a long time and eventually folds, so we don't get the action we were looking for. Not sure what he had, but happy to take it down anyway. Move on to the next hand with a little bit of a bigger stack. This next hand doesn't have a ton of action, but I think it's really interesting, and it's one of the spots that I like to study when going back and looking over hands and trying to improve my game. The way the hand went down was there was 3 limpers, I was in the big blind, and the small blind made it $20. I looked down at king, queen of spades from the big blind. I decided to just call and play in position to the aggressor, which I think is the preferred line here, and all of the limpers fold. So heads up to a flop, which comes jack 5-5 with 2 clubs. He puts out a continuation bet of $20. I think he's gonna be doing this with pretty much 100% of his range, except for maybe pocket jacks. So I decided to float and see what happens on the turn. The turn is the jack of diamonds, bringing in a second flush draw, and obviously any jack or 5 makes a full house now. Surprisingly, my opponent bets out pretty quickly, bets $50. I go into the tank here because I think the majority of the time he should be checking over pairs or pretty much all his value hands on this turn card, seeing as our hand looks a lot like a jack. So I think it's worth contemplating going for a raise here and make it really difficult for our opponent to continue with any of his value holdings aside from a jack. Anyway, didn't think this guy was the type to fold, so I decided to just fold and avoid such a marginal spot, but I do think it would have been a cool time to turn our hand into a bluff. Didn't pull the trigger, but against a thinking player, I think it's a cool idea. Moving on to the next hand. In this next hand, there's 4 or 5 limpers. The small blind completes, and I decided to check the big blind with pocket 3s. The flop comes ace-9-3 with 2 clubs. Small blind checks it over to me, and I decide to just lead out and get value from all aces and flush draws. I make it $15 to go. Folds all the way to the late position player, and she makes the call. Kind of troubling, seeing as she was a fairly tight player, but we obviously have such a good hand that it doesn't really matter. The small blind folds, so everyone gets out of the way except for me and the OWC. Heads up to a turn, which is not my favorite card. 7 of clubs, bringing in obviously all the flushes. I decided to check it over to her and see what she decides to do. And she puts out a bet pretty quickly of $20. Obviously not gonna fold bottom set to just one bet, so I make the call. So still heads up to a river here, which is the Jack of clubs, making her hand even worse. I check it over to her, and at this point, I'm expecting her to check back all pair, 2 pair, even sets, being that there's 4 clubs on board, and that usually freezes players. But she pretty quickly leads out for $50. I make a pretty easy fold in my opinion, especially against this player type. And sure enough, she shows King 10 of clubs. So that last club actually hurt her. I might have paid off, not too sure, probably not. I don't know, I hate folding. Anyway, moving on to the next hand. Set doesn't work out this time. All right, in this last hand, we open up pocket kings from under the gun to $15. The small blind makes the call and the big blind gets out of the way. So heads up to a flop of 8, 6, deuce, all hearts. The small blind checks it over to us, and although I don't mind a bet here, I decide to check it back. Definitely want to throw in some value hands in our check back range. We can't always be betting when we have it and checking when we don't have it. I check behind and we go heads up to a turn of Queen of Hearts. So now, obviously we lose to any heart. It's not the best turn in the deck. And the small blind leads out for $20. We're pretty under repped, not gonna fold to just one bet, obviously, so I make the call, and we're still heads up to a river, which is a black 3. Doesn't really change anything, and once again, the small blind leads out for $20. I think this tiny bet is gonna be indicative of a weak flush the majority of the time, or just a hand that's trying to get to showdown cheaply, so I decided to turn the kings into a bluff here and put in a raise. I don't think we're gonna be good if we call. He could easily have a weak flush. So I make it $75 to go. Sure enough, he shows us the 10 of hearts and folds. So we get that one through. I'm glad that the read was on point in that exact situation. Didn't play it the most conventional way, but it worked out, and we pick up the last pot of this session to end things on a good note. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed those hands. I played for around 2 hours. We were in for 300 and out for 524. Seems like a pretty good win to me, and I'm happy with those results considering how short the session was. Okay, so before I wrap things up, there's a few announcements I wanted to go over. I don't usually do this kind of thing, but they're gonna be quick, I promise. Number one is gonna be that I'll be back in Vegas, I think the first week of July, maybe the second week, for some more cash game poker. So if you guys wanna meet up, just grab a beer or play some poker together, add me on Instagram, send me a message, and we'll figure it out for next month. Secondly, for those of you who are interested in podcasts, either while trying to sleep or driving or whatever the case may be, there's a really good podcast I listen to. It's a poker podcast, but it's not exactly educational. It's about a player who used to play nosebleeds and now has sunk back down to the 1-3/2-5 levels and is trying to work his way back up. It's a really interesting story, and he's just really entertaining to listen to. Great guy, and I think there's a lot to learn from him. So if you guys think that sounds interesting, check out the podcast called Sessions on iTunes, and I think it's on Google too. Makes for really good listening material, and I think you guys will highly enjoy it. This is not an advertisement of any sort, just trying to help you guys out with some easy listening while you're going to and from sessions. Next, I wanted to let you guys know that I've been getting a lot of requests for a vlog from Pechanga Casino in Southern California, so that's where I'll be headed next. Gonna make a video on that place. I've never been there myself, so I'm pretty excited, and I suggest you guys subscribe if you wanna check out that next video. Moving on, if there's any of you guys who wanna support the channel, I am a college student and I do have a lot of debt, so I started a Patreon. Want to pay off these loans and move up to 2.5 and 5.10 as soon as possible. So if you guys want to throw in a big blind or two every month, the link is in the description box. Obviously, no worries if you guys can't, but if any of you guys out there are feeling generous, hit the link in the description. All right, and lastly, for those of you guys who are interested, although poker is one of my favorite things to do, my main passion is actually music and music production. So this outro song that's about to play is actually one I produced last week. So leave me a comment down below, letting me know what you think. I hope you guys like it. Anyway, that concludes the vlog for today. Good luck out there, guys, and I wish you all the best. See you next time. Peace.